Peace and love, family. Black first. My name is DJ Joker, and you're watching Historical Origins Part 6. First off, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everybody that's tuning in, taking the time out to learn with me today. If you are new here to this channel, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like this video, make sure you share this content. If you have no idea what we do here on the Midwest Black, basically Historical Origins is the channel where we debunk history. That's right, world history. And it's a topic that a lot of us don't take a lot of time to get into, or you kind of may overlook it. I know when we were growing up in a lot of those trashy high schools, sports and, some of the class work and all that cool stuff was there, but, world history was garbage. And that's left a lot of us lost. It's left a lot of us confused, and we really don't know what we're talking about. So family, I've taken my time out to put some work together for you all, and I've studied this stuff. I've researched all this stuff. This is, 13, 14 years in the making. So I just want to be clear about that, serious work, serious research. And I encourage all the serious people who want to go on this journey with me, to come here and learn so we can have this platform and, continue to share this type of information. A lot of this stuff is the reasons why we are locked out of society the way we are today. So, you got to go to the past a little bit to get to the present so you can understand everything. For my longtime listeners, this is part 6. Again, if you're new, make sure you go watch parts 1 through 5. That way you can be caught up. All of this work is meant to go together, and it's kind of like a blueprint. And pretty much we're going to end or keep going when we get to, current events or up in today's time. Right now, we're in like the 10th, 11th century. So please go back and get all of that good information before, so that way you won't miss out. Let's get to it. This is Historical Origins, Part 6. All right, guys, let's get going. And when we left off in part 5, we kind of left off in the whole Hellenization area. We left off with the Moors, impacting Spain in a big way, and that whole thing. Again, if you don't know what Hellenization is, if you don't understand who the Moors really are in history, make sure you go watch part 5. It's going to be critical here in a second when we move forward. So you had all of this stuff going on, huge Greco-Roman area, them forcing their religion down on the people, conquering, takeover, so forth. And then we talked about kind of the foundation, of Christianity and what was going on. And we kind of left off in the 11th century of, talking back about the Moors reaching America, but it wasn't the first time they got there. So we're going to go back a little bit here in this series, and we're going to kind of pinpoint each step of the way. So I talked about these guys right here also in part 5. And these are Pope Clement, Ignatius of Antioch, and Polycarp. You need to really understand who these 3 popes were to really kind of get what was going on. And you got to remember, these guys were almost like the blueprint and the foundation, and put up on this pedestal amongst all of the people when it came to real early Christianity. But again, at this time, early 1st century, none of it was concrete. None of it was formed. We already had councils about what was going in, the Bibles at that time and what was going to be taking place. So all of this stuff is very heavily man-made, man-edited. And these 3 have their hands all over it. And matter of fact, Polycarp, just so happens to get burnt at the stake. He gets burnt on the cross, rather. And again, I made a point in part 5 that how that wasn't significant, to a Jesus, or if there was one, because there was many people getting crucified like this at that time. It was very common, and that's what they were doing to the religious figures. Basically the Greco-Romans that were still pushing Hellenization, because you had that and you had Christianity in its earliest forms going on at the same time, and these popes, so-called, trying to stop Hellenization because it was so bad. These people were doing all kind of backward stuff. We talked about, Saturnalia, their holidays, and all the perversion of, the Greco-Roman area. But you still had some people fighting against it, and those people would be the heavy religious figures. So these 3 had their hands and their fingerprints all over early gospels, early, verses and things like that. And we kind of broke that down a little bit. But you got to understand that this is pretty much going to give the spread of followers, and these followers are going to go certain ways, basically east and west, as they like to say. So that is how you get your Roman Catholic Church and your Eastern Orthodox Church, because basically what Rome decided to do, they're starting to see the people are all spiritual in some kind of way, and Hellenization is start to backfire. So Rome kind of really gets smart and ushers in, this whole religious area of the church. But the church is always accompanied, with military and with arms and all these other things. And it's almost like the cover up. As much as the Vatican is today, religion is what is the cover up, but it's really a business, and it runs like a business, and it's hard politics, and it's hard, taxation of the people, and really a control aspect of it all. So you have the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church that is going to spring up out of this. And so still to this day, you have that very same thing. And there are differences of what they believe and how they believe it, how it happened, and things like that. If it was all one God and it was all one script, you would think these things would be the same. But that's the reason why they have this, and that's eschatology. And a lot of people that are, in Christian worship, or, if you pastors, reverends, everybody can understand what this is. And basically, this is the code of religion. And this was created at that time of the popes that I just talked about, and basically that was your oral code of what to be said and what's going to go with this version. So again, here you see man, coming in and inserting his presence to control the narrative of these religions. This is how you know that this word of God, or so-called perfect word of God, cannot be, because we wouldn't have, classes and training on this. Some people can say, well, that's just, you have to be trained and you have to be spiritually open to the religion. I get that. But this is completely different. You have to stay on code with the story, with the narrative, with the crucifixion, with everything like that. And still, even at this time that it's created, it's not even in a, concrete order. That's why you have these two churches going on. And still, even at this time, you have people worshiping, the old Kemetic way, that was getting lost and pushed further, into Africa. Which later would spawn up all of these other, African civilizations that still knew that knowledge, particularly like the Dogon, the descendants that are going to get pushed out of Kemet with all of this stuff and, head west. But in the East, what you're going to have is, a huge attack and influence on Ethiopia. So a lot of, people, give this good defense of Christianity being early, in Ethiopia. And that is true, but it's not the Christianity that we're dealing with today. And that's what you really have to understand. This is the version that was created by, some of those popes and other religious figures. And a lot of these figures, are not, real. The guys that I gave you are real people, but there's so many other people when you start to look that have their hands in this, the dates are off. You don't know if they exactly lived or whatnot, but they give credit to these works. So, you have the work, but sometimes you don't have the bodies of the people, they say, who created these works. Same thing with their, artists and sculptors. We already talked about that, through the Greek area. So you have the Garima Gospels here, 400 to 660 CE, around this time, and these are, accredited to, finds in Ethiopia, ancient Ethiopia, where they're going to start to build those rock hill churches and all that kind of stuff. And even in some of those structures, at that time, the black people that were there, they still were building, ancient Kemetic, type buildings and different ancient African, spiritual, structures, amongst all of these Christianized areas. But, Christianity was forced here too. So it's the same today. You get a couple cools to do the work, and then you indoctrinate everybody else. And that's why Ethiopia to this day is still one of the most Christianized and heavy, religious, Jesus-loving countries in Africa, and it starts here, and they believe this history is all original and accredited to the whole narrative, that was created, that was wrote about, and again, this is not the same thing. But this is where it all comes up, and you'll find out about the 9 saints. And again, family, you have these 9 saints who are heavily accredited to the Garima Gospels. So it's not, again, black created. This is not a black Bible. You still have Greco-Romans, doing the influence, these Catholic priests, all giving their say, but pushing this Christianity religion pretty much as far as they could go in Africa, and it was Egypt at the time. Anywhere else, there was battle, there was fighting, and they could not go again into that Ayatori forest, the Congo area. So I want to make a point too, family, that at this time too, Buddhism, Buddhism is going to start to spring up. And the only reason why I'm jumping off into this, because it is also a black religion as well, or black spiritual system that, is influenced by the Nile Valley Africans. Buddhism basically found its way, from this so-called Middle East, Northeastern Africa, because it was all the same thing, family. Y'all know this already, into India, into China, and so on. You have these black Buddhas all over Asia. I don't have to show you guys that. That hair knotted, all that. But this is Buddharama, and he lives around this time too, and he's heavily accredited all through Indian history and everything like that, as far as bringing this Buddha spiritual system in, which once was black too. Like, again, so every religion has a black base to it, and I get when some people say, well, hey, well, if it's all the same, then why is the problem? No, it is still is a problem, because you're giving energy, you're giving time to certain deities and gods that is negative and not for you. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with Buddhism, but I'm just saying in some of these other things. So just wanted to point that out. Now, after this time, we already talked about the Moors. We talked about this heavy, presence of these black, Africans, some of them part Islamic too, or when you had the rise of Islam, we covered that in part 5 as well, moving to Spain and all of that. Well, at that time, early, in England, and all of Germany and all of that. Again, Greco-Roman era, these areas are savage. They're still barbaric. You have what, your Anglo-Saxon. This is where they come from in their descent. People, these are descendants of cavemen, if you will, during this time. All of these people, and they're going to mix in with the Vikings. The Vikings are going to come down. We have this whole thing called Norman England. And basically, I'm pointing this out is because later I'm going to prove, how English is, one, not that old. And this language also goes with the religion. You have to have a new language with the religion to basically, classify it to a certain group of people. It should be sacred, but the thing with Christianity is not. There's so many versions of it, but I want to point out that English is a late version, and it was pretty much created and pushed forward to help confuse the slaves, and we'll get to that. But this is the root. This is the foundation. All of these old English, old Physian, old French, old Latin. You had so many bastardized talking, languages that mixed up. This is where we get all these cursing and negative thoughts. People that are living in a negative environment can only produce such negative words, and we know what they were doing, and we already know their sexual behaviors and the things that was going on. So you had all this going on, and at one point in time, 1066, the Germanic Viking people, they're going to attack, where Rome is and all of that. Again, extending this Visigoth era. We already kind of went through it. The Moors fought them off, but now you have a second wave because they, documented fighting these people, these probably inbred too at that time. Those type of people, old German type of people. But one thing that I want to point out is at this time, because what Europeans like to do, and they like to accredit it, the find of America by, Europeans first, or specific areas, which is not true. We already talked about the Moors and when they were there at a late time, but we're going to get at an even earlier time in this video and give you the exact date and time when America was populated. But while we're on these Vikings coming down at the same time, after coming in contact with the Moors, again, they were civilizing Europe, bringing in goods from all the trade routes. They knew everything. You had builders, you had carpenters, you had skilled people, doing things and castle building and all of that. These Vikings, the ones that were defeated, because the Moors had many cities, many castles, they would take the remnants, take the scraps, enslave some of the people, force their labor for building and all of that kind of stuff. Now, we had many map makers of the Moors, which is very, very highly accredited to them, as being seamen and all of that. We talked about in Kemet how we had boats and we were already on the sea, so the Moors basically carried that knowledge too. So the Germans would eventually get a hold of that and basically come down, and once wars that they would win, would happen, they take the scraps, and this is how they would get ships. So you have this guy, Leek Erikson. He had a crew of Vikings, mixed mulatto crew too at that, basically get lost off course, from the Ireland area and find his way over into this area where we call the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is in Canada. It's above, America and all that. You can kind of see on the map where we got that. And he basically found it by mistake, and when he got there, there were already people there, and I'm going to talk about who those people were later, but people who they said were dark skinned, and everything like that. But I'm going to tell you who they ran into. So even at this time in 970 to 1020, when the Vikings came over, they never stepped foot in North America, only Canada and all up there. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, we talked about the Knights Templar also too in part 5. And as you remember, the Knights Templar were who I just mentioned ago, the armed guards working for the Catholic Church. You don't need that today, but imagine, your church having military who would cut your heads off and all that. They were just, a different form of basically land pirates, but some of them were on sea too, because some of those Germans and those brutes, because of the victories and the things that they were doing and killing the Moors, successfully, some of them got hired, and that's how they got their jobs. And the church sent these people out to steal and ravage. That's why I said it's a cover-up. You have the religion aspect here. One, but they already know it's made up. They already know they stole everything and where they got it from. So they still need a military to do their dirty work. So those were the Knights Templar, and I talked about them more in detail in 5 and again, what they were already doing and the guys that they were worshiping. So they knew some of, the Moorish, science. They knew, Kemetic science, because they were ravaging all of these places. But if you look close, family, you see why today we got the Red Cross. And you also see, if you remove this helmet and put a hood on it, why the KKK, chose to wear white robes. Why the Catholic priest wears that white robes. They always connect white with pure and all of that, like it's innocent and this, that, and the third. But these are some of your most vicious savages in world history. Now, so the Roman Catholic Church in 1210, they're going to order the Knights Templar to seize a territory. It was a castle. This is remnants of it, but no longer. But this was a Moorish Empire. Aldamas, and they were forced to seize that because, again, they're steady, going to war with them. They're steady trying to get rid of them. And one of the biggest things was race mixing and then changing the color of the population, because, a lot of that was going on. And we talked about that in part 5, how, white women were really, big in slavery back then. And, were some of, your first slaveries because how the white man treated his woman. And that was one thing that would be tokens to some of the Moorish men. Hey, I'll give you a woman for resources. And then, a couple weeks down the later, they, turn their back on them and kill them. Take the wife back, take the resources, and then that's how they get all these ships, man. It's crazy. Sounds funny, but this is literally what they were doing. So you have this big war going on. And this is big and critical because this is one of the final battles that's just pretty much going to weaken, the Moorish army and everything like that. So after that battle, now we get this whole area of the Magna Carta, and it's funny, Jay-Z being one of my favorite rappers, we all know the Magna Carta Holy Grail classic album, one of his best. But a lot of people didn't understand that. What does that mean? Basically what you're going to have, King John of England at this time, he's in power, and pretty much they want to change the rules. They want to change, certain guidelines of what's going on between people that work for the church, people that are, common people, just your common laws and things like that, and what the church could be more involved in or not involved in upon these sieges and things that was going on. So you had all kind of rebellion, also the barons or the Red Barons who were, against war with the church still, because they saw the church as the power. It all had the religion, but it also had the military, and it was now getting the treasures. It was now getting the goods. So this whole Magna Carta thing was basically to keep them, out of the fire for whatever they did. They could do anything without imprisonment and things like that. And some favors were worked out for the enemies as well. So you have this whole era of them now beginning to, again, more so change the laws to affect the common people. So it's really important because jurisdictions are going to start to widen and change, for the church versus, these people, because everybody was doing it. And you also had different countries, England's kind of last on the trade, over after, Rome and Germany and Spain and Italy and Greece. England is last coming in, to power. So basically now they're trying to, fund their own expeditions and things like that. A lot of these, early explorers and all of that were funded by certain, crowns and certain queens and kings to go find, what the Moors had and bring it back. So it's very important that we know that. Now also at this time, we're going to start to get the, pretty much our downfall to this day. It's crazy, from the 1240s up into now, the technology and how much has went into gun making, and how many of us get gunned down, for no reason with the police, and still dealing with these brute arms and these race soldiers. It's crazy, but it all started back then, and it's still going on. Once they got hold of those trade routes, they got information from the Moors, they got the gunpowder, tea, sugar cane, tobacco, all of these things. Gunpowder was then, put in different blow sticks and set on fire, like flaming arrows and things like that they were already doing. And then they began to making, pellet balls and pellet forms, with steel coatings and different coatings and different stronger projectiles. And the next thing you know, you got them on, ships, and you got small handguns and rockets. And when this comes out, this is immediately going to put the fear in the people, because the Moors had guns too also. They're the ones who invented them, flat out. They won't give you them credit, but they were ahead. But again, once they start seizing these areas, once they start taking over, you acquire all this. And they worked hard and long to evolve the weapons and to do different things, so that was the type of mentality they went to. And then they also, some of the Moors that they kept around, you see in a lot of these old pirate movies, even in Pirates of the Caribbean, they have a couple black people on the ship. Those are Moors at that time, being, seamen, being the navigators, and things like that. And also creating this technology and other weapons. They were paid off. You had coons back then, I told you. So it's crazy when that comes. Now you have the Italians, kind of get in to the trade and everything that was going on again. Italy starts to, rise a little bit more of all of the things that are coming in. You already had Spain and areas, but now the cities are getting even more, the churches doing that. And now they're going to fund, Vandigo and Ugulo, Valindi, some of these names, again, forgive me family, are hard to say, but these merchants, explorers, more hitmen, more mercenaries, more pirates, if you will. They're going to be funded and pretty much go the same way that the Vikings, that they knew the Vikings went. I told you about them and their, mistake of their expedition. Well, a lot of times when some of these people didn't come back, you had other people. They would put money together, get other ships to go find them, because they knew that they had to reach some other land. And the stories were there. Well, the Moors and all these people didn't give it up, right away. They fought back, but you had some collaborators also. Giving it up, and, they got captured. White people were kind of getting on code, if you will, more at this time in a war sense, all started from Alexander, and again, even before that, when we talked about the Hittites and the Hyksos, all of that, in earlier series, it's always been the same people kind of, in the mix that are our biggest enemies even to this day. So you have the Valindi brothers come down, and they're going to sail, off the coast of Morocco and pretty much towards the Canary Islands, and this was a port here, one of the biggest ports of, the Moorish, Arab, trade routes and into Africa and off the islands. But the Europeans weren't hitting it like that. They were just now coming accustomed that you could even go that way and it was land that way. And a lot of them still were thinking that you could get to India, going west, from Africa versus going, east. So they didn't know what the hell was going on. Nevertheless, so now you have a lot of the Knights Templars off of their finds and off of the things that they're coming across and these maps and the shipbuilding and all that. They start to keep this stuff for themselves, and they're going to slowly kind of break away from the church and being dirty. And the church doesn't like that. And remember, we talked about popes getting burned at the stake and all of that because of if you weren't on code, because it was always that army brute force strength. So Friday the 13th, 1307. This is where we get Friday the 13th from. The church had their other, paid mercenaries, other hitmen, surround down the Knights Templars or whoever they could find and pretty much burn them all at the stake. Because for stealing one and, finding new lands and not returning, or finding information and lying about it and things like that. And the church was trying to also get its hands on new territory to expand, and to not only that, expand, the religion or what was coming about, so it's crazy, but this is what's going to take place, family. Then after that, you have Malicello. Again, a lot of these names I'm going to butcher, as country folks, we have a time. But anyway, now they discovered the Canary Islands, in 1312. And in 1339, they actually put it on a map. So now it's full blown that there's something over there. They know they got land, all of that. But again, like I told you before that, you had, Mansa Musa and, Sundiata. They were already coming to America, and this is that mix of kind of almost bringing Europeans more into the clutch. The Vikings kind of went unnoticed for almost 200 years, but again, information is slower. People are slower putting things together and trying to continue these missions and things like that. So now the Canary Islands end up on the map in 1339. Now, what's important, family, is because it's 1328 is when Mr. John Wycliffe is born. John Wycliffe worked for the church, and all the time when you had, churches or these different, monasteries and mosques and cathedrals and pantheons, all that kind of stuff, you had religious figures in there that were also skilled at writing. People at this time were still illiterate because you didn't have, one solid language in, England at this time. You had not even English but old, Norse from the Germans, and Latin's going to come in and kind of combine all of these words. But English is just becoming a thing, Old English. And so now John Wycliffe in 1382 puts the Bible in English. Now, this is not your 1611 Bible. This is all the previous versions. So whatever they had at that time, and we talked about what they had at that time, all the different codices and things like that. And he put them into English. Now, can you imagine that all of these different versions that were wrote, or probably the few that they really had, them converting into basically a brand new language, but not even perfected at this time. So this is really a broken English. We know how the pirates talk. And all of these cavemen Europeans, we know how they spoke, So again, even in the 1300s, English was not a thing, even though they were translating the text into it. This is an old English form. That's why you don't find those previous Bibles like that written in really old English. It's all old Latin, which, then this English is going to come out of that. So I just want to point that out. Now, Prince Havering the Navigator. Prince Havering the Navigator. We all know him. We've heard about him in school. Some of us haven't. But again, another, hitman. These guys are mercenaries. And when you grow up in school, they try to make it seem like these are all heroes and they leave the story short. Murderers and thieves, rapists, all of that. He's the same thing, finding these routes, Canary Islands. And he had many hitmen that he would pay to do other different things like that and take the credit for it. All of these people were trying to get trinkets and blessings from the crown, and, get whatever money they could get put up on the pedestal, and you're wrote into history, or history they can lie about. But this is for the Portuguese, so now the Portuguese are getting involved. You got the Italians, you got the Portuguese, you got the English, the Germans, still the Romans. Right now, Greece is nothing. Greece is nothing, really the Romans. And so these guys are just coming together and they are storming on Africa. They're storming on the Moors. Okay, this is who they're fighting. And they're also taking, slaves at this time. And now, like I said, you had the gun. So that completely changed the landscape of fear and terror. But people were still fighting back, doing our things. Now, 1400 we get to. James Gutenberg. The printing press is just invented. And now, this is, your Reformation era, all of that. They talk about the Renaissance era. We'll get into a little bit of that in part 7. But, printing press is here. So now this is bringing them in, and this is for the Germans. And what are they going to do? They're going to print the version of the Bible they had at that time. And again, when you conquer a people and you're trying to conquer a people, you can have your way with them if you conquer them, spiritually, and if you conquer them sexually. And still to this day, what do you see what's happening in society? And we wonder why we can't get things done. The rape and pillage of these people, it will never stop until you stand up and do something. I'm going to leave that at that. So, Alves Caldamsto, trying hard to get the names right, family. 1432, this fool was hired by Prince Henry the Navigator, and his thing was slave trading, so they were already doing it, but the slaves were part of the crew, part of the ships, and forced Moors really, and other forced Africans, because not only you had the Moors, or Islamic Moors, you had still African Moors that were non-Islamic. So you still had different, black pots of Moorish men. And when some of them would get held captive and all these things, you had them enslaved to man the ship, whether it was, getting different supplies for it or building them or things like that. That's kind of how it was started. Or if you wouldn't do it, then hey, here we go. Now we're going to, kill you, force you against your will. But slavery, like I said, it takes parts. It was step by step into what they were going to do. But one thing they knew for sure that they were going to do, that black people, or the lesser black people, because you still had the Arab, the Arab African, slave trade, or you had Moors involved with that, and the Africans that were, left over, or the workers, or the people that were in the temples, Kemet and all that, these people would become enslaved. We talked about that. That's what the whole Punic War area is about, putting brute force down on all those people in the northern Sahara and in northern Egypt. And once they do that, those are going to become the enslaved people, and Africans that want power, would also participate in that. So you have Moors doing that too, and you would have them present at the same time that they had slaves, but they were working. Still some of them were getting vandalized and all of that, especially when they got to these other islands and starting to go. So the Canary Islands, the people that were there, these were other Africans that had came over long ago and had already been there. And you had Moors, giving them supplies and going back and forth. And then once they start to show up, this is when these Europeans oftentimes, played the game differently and switched up and started killing and murdering everybody, and murdering some of the crewmen also when they fought back. Look it up. Now, Queen Isabella, this stinking trifling trick, when she comes into power, things change again a little bit more, and she's going to sit on the throne, and you're going to have something spark up, the Granadan War, the War of Granada, which is basically the last final war of the Moors. After this war, there are no more. And it's important because they were at a time where they wanted to end the Islamic rule, or people, or the white people, or mixed people that were taking upon Islam, because that was one thing that the Moors were also doing. So now you had Islam here, you had Christianity, trying to start to form and get it on the road, and then you had people that were still spread out who knew the Kemetic knowledge, but most of them already had flew, and it's going to pretty much stay into Africa, or a lot of that had left already with the Moors that had previously came over. And some of them, when they found America and other spots, they stayed there, which is crazy. And again, already had been there. So you're going to have this, and pretty much the ruling is, if you don't convert to Christianity, you need to leave Spain or you will be murdered. And that's how they were doing it, and it was brutal. It was brute force. It's never been a break with these people. And this is what you're going to have. So Queen Elizabeth is going to, strike up all of this, and this is going to go on. Now, at that same time, after you have the war, now things are down, things are weak. After you have that, the Moors are weak, the Moors are enslaved, or they're collaborating at this time, or they've already fled and just, left and never came back. And some of them went to different islands to warn others, even when they, when we talk about, Santo Domingo and all that, when we get in, you had other people going down there and letting these people know that, hey, white daddy is coming. So the Nino brothers, these were black Spaniards because again, you had a lot of, the Spaniards were biracial, Grecians themselves were biracial, hair texture, guys, think about it. So you had a lot of these, African descent people in, particularly in West Africa that was getting this knowledge that were part of the Moors. A lot of these families, had map makers and other skilled, merchants and, blacksmiths in the family, and they would, get hired for their skills and do things like that. So the Nino brothers were very popular. Matter of fact, Pedro Alonso Nino, 1455, he's even got this statue here. And this is what they're saying what this brother looked like, looked like a cousin of mine or something. But these were the brothers that were with Christopher Columbus. Like I said, the credit's always given, to the enemy. But without these Moorish collaborators or these Moorish people that were enslaved, black people, they wouldn't have found America, or what would, soon to become America. And we're going to tell you about that big lie too. So Christopher Columbus was helped by the Nino brothers. These brothers are incredible for the skills they had, but hey, they cooned it out a little bit. So Christopher Columbus, 1451, you're going to get him. Now, what we got to understand about Christopher Columbus, people think he's, a Spanish person. Like I said, a lot of times they had people from different regions, with different resources or from royal families or whatever. I do this favor, do that favor for you. You know how it go. So Christopher Columbus is actually a Roman. He's a Jewish Roman, and you can find that in his notes from his son that was on the ships and all that kind of stuff of where they really came from, and so he was paid by Spain, by the crown, for this fine and everything like that. So that's how all of this starts, so this fine was going to be credited to Spain, and England and all of that, but again, they paid this guy. They talk about it as Portuguese, Roman. Okay, you can look it up and find that. But as you see, the first voyage is in blue here on the map. You see where they landed first, the Bahamas area. You see the second voyage, the third voyage, the fourth voyage, and all of that. Going in, coming back with supplies, figuring out what's going on. Nino brothers, let them to it. Let them to it. Had it not been for this in history, and we were some way able to double cross Columbus, we were some way able to double cross Vespucci and a lot of other these, explorers, we would probably be in a different stance. If there was some way we could have just got to America, got on code with the people there and kept them out of there, which I do feel like eventually it would have went there. They were just, persistent, and they knew by any means necessary they had to get the upper hand. So you see all of this. This is another good map to look at, family. It just kind of shows you where they were going and how, the territories were discovered and pretty much what the ship routes were. Now, Treaty of Tostadas. This is, again, one of the most important and crucial, moments of history. And you got to understand. So once the British crown or the Spanish crown, whatever, found America or the Americas, you have this treaty, Queen Elizabeth puts out, and that whole, party is basically splitting America, or splitting the world in half. The world. How do you do that? You can only do that when somehow you feel like you're the only people in the world. But that wasn't the thing. It was just because off of what they said and how they rocked according to their law, that they could go somewhere else and just claim it. But they knew that they were going to claim it by brute force, and the whole thing was going to be a setup, and those people that were there were going to get murdered. They knew that, so they just claimed it up. And basically, what would happen is you would have, I got it here on the map. Yeah, so Spain would get North America and South America almost, and Portugal would get Africa and, everything over there. So you have the Portuguese and the Spanish, the two biggest at this time, all paying, Roman, Italian merchants, German merchants, all these people are mixed. So when they even credit the fine for something, you can't believe that. But they divide everything up in the family, in the findings, rather. So just like that. And from that point on, it starts to get downhill, family. Bartholomew Columbus, now Chris is bringing in his brother, appointing him as general, on, grounds of, the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, they called it, which it was called something else, and they just came here and said that what it was, 1496 is when you're going to get that. But Bartholomew Columbus is credited for that. Chris could make it on one of these kidnapping, raping, enslaving journeys. And now, he got his brother. They will pull a lot of the people in like that. And so now you're going to have this whole area start to get colonized. And one thing I can't wait to talk about is what happens in 1804, family. Because a lot of I wish that America, the same thing would have happened, but that's okay, because history, again, has a funny way of replaying itself out. But nevertheless, now the whole Dominican, all of these islands, Barbados, the Bahamas is all, conquered. And that's a huge problem because now the natives are really aware of what's going on. And El Cuban, this brother here was one of the native tribes, king of Panama. So they were even in there. They took Panama, all of that was gone, but they fought back, on record of trying to kill these people and fend them off. But what did you have? You had the gun coming in place, and how them describing, they didn't see the, they seen these weapons, but these weapons were not used, in the way that they were using them, and how they had created them. And, almost 200, 300 years after they've been invented, how much they have evolved by, the 1500s now. So they were coming in with, 6-shot, things, some things, no, not 6-shot things. They didn't have that yet, but they had different ways to, project more rounds quicker and everything like that. But the Niobe people, on his fourth and last voyage, he's going to run into these people. And I'm thankful that they fought back. Now, well, this is where we're going to turn and we're going to talk about America, because people always talk about Indigenous Peoples Day and this, that, and the other. The thing I want to point out and be clear on it. Now, I understand indigenous tribes. I understand what indigenous means, but do you? Some of you may need to reread that definition. And the reason why I say that is because every tribe that came to America, they were not indigenous. And the reason I said that is because just about every tribe that came to America, they did not start off there. Okay, meaning that they did not originate there and they did not transform and develop there over a period of time. Most of the people that are going to be found in America all migrated there at some point in time throughout history. Now, I wanted to point it out, talking about that, because most of the tribes that are going to come to America, the reason why I say they're not indigenous, technically by definition, is because they all migrated at some point in time. And I feel like to be an indigenous tribe, you need to go, several thousand years without your lineage, your several hundred, I wouldn't say thousand. At least 500 years, let's be fair, without your stock, without your gene pool, being altered. In America, it's been so chopped up and so many different, stocks of people have been created here on this land that it's like all of the tribes that came here, when they got here, eventually they were infused with something else. Okay, around the same time. So that's why I say that a lot of the tribes here are not indigenous. We just use that, for credibility. They use that for certain benefits, especially America's does, and the things that they won't give us. When we know that if we're going to talk about any indigenous people, they're all black, they're all native, and what we are, Native African Americans. Now, so the Wisconsin glaciation, 2000 BC to 12,000 BC. So you have this ice age. It doesn't start to melt until around 12,000 BC. So after this starts to melt, or around the time that it's finally over melting, you've already had Nile Valley civilization going on. Now, Kemet and none of that stuff is there yet, but the civilization and people have already been moving around. And this is important because you couldn't have had any tribes here at that time. The Nile Valley is one of the only places that people could live because you still had other glaciers and stuff like that. Not in the South at this time, and we're going to point out to those tribes, but around the world, you still had other ice glaciers where you could not live. So I want to point this out and just so we can kind of get a timeline with the people there. Now, so when we talk about the Bering Strait, a lot of people know what that is, basically from Russia to the Americas at this point in time. Or, when we talk about the glaciation period, it also kind of included that. And you had an ice bridge. Alaska was a little more high up towards Washington and Oregon. And you had this connected to Russia by ice, Russia and Asia area by ice. Okay. And so you had, the Angolonian, or they call it Angoloquin, tribes, these different tribes related to Anglo. And when they talk about, Anglo, type skulls, so they talk about the feature. Now, a lot of people know that Anglo means, white to a degree, but in this specific case, it really does not. We're more so talking about the phenotype, and they kind of group all of these language under there, relating to the skull: Negroid, Angoloid, Caucasoid, you know what I mean? So you have these descendants from Asia. So we talked about the Churma and the Champa, the Negritos that founded, Japan and all of that a long time ago, coming from the Nile Valley over, Middle Eastern Africa, into India, into, Australia, into Japan, all of these places. Well, at that time, you're also going to have some of those same people. We call them the Ainu. And when they get to Alaska, they're going to keep that name, the Ainu or the Ainut. Those same people are going to be here. These are the indigenous people that are going to come over and be, the tribes of North America and all that. Again, they migrated. But this is a time, again, we're talking what? I don't know, 10, 12,000 years at this time, 11,000 years. Now you start to have people here. And remember when I said that when the Vikings even came over here, but this is, thousands of years later, then they run into the descendants of those people, and they're going to call them Skraelings, basically meaning dried skin. Who else got dry skin other than some black people, especially in all this cold? So you got to understand how long those people had already been there. And again, I've used this migration map before just to kind of back up what I said of, when human migration started out of Africa into these areas. You can see the dates. I can't really zoom in because we're recording, but you can see these dates on there when we got to this place, and how it says, 12,000 years, we're hitting America. This is after that ice age. So it's very important that you remember that. Now we go to 1100, 500 BC. We talk about the Clovis culture. I think down in Oklahoma or Kansas, or Clovis City or something like that. But relating to the people that were there, where we find artifacts, the Clovis being named after the spearheads. And I got this picture, of another map just kind of showing you the regions of what was open at that time. See, even South America got some ice in it, but it's not a lot. North America's covered, but you can see it's still open. Now, we just happen to hit South America first, and then we're going to come up, and then you have people coming from the Bering Strait, at different times. But again, these cultures are migrating in. They weren't born there. See, that's the difference. In Africa, like I said, people were born there, cultivated and all that. Then they got their show on the road to come into these other areas. Now, when we talk about the indigenous Australians, you got to remember, Australia, once it broke off, you had people there for so long. And all of these, the people we call the indigenous people there, slipping my mind right now, but they were there for so long, and they were untouched, unmixed, ungene compromised. Okay, that's indigenous. And the same thing with a lot of these Asian cultures. It took so long for something else to come in there and to change that gene pool. So that's the point of my difference when we talk about indigenous cultures. Everybody migrated to America. And then this photo right here, we got these 3 points of where the Giza pyramid is. There's pyramids in Southern Africa, and there's pyramids in Mexico. And they all, again, kind of make another pyramid. And this isn't by coincidence. And again, we know the culture who was doing it and building these structures, okay? And how do you get this knowledge into the Americas, or that type of building skill when we talk about stone building and all of that? So it's something to pay attention to. We got to go to the Olmecs. Now, we talk about this place called Suriname, 3000 BC. Now, with 3000 BC, you know, Kemet is pretty much already existent. The land is there. They're starting on those dynasties. Everything is getting ready to be started. And this is the time and the height and the age of the, stone building that's going to come in, and all the masonry and all of that. And at 3000 BC, we're telling you, you have what they would call eventually the Maroon colonies, or these colonies of Maroons, being found in Suriname. So how else did they reach it if they did not come across the ocean? So boat making at that time is not what it would be thousands of years later. But what you got to understand, there were different island chains also. So you could hit an island with something, you could stop, you could repair, you're taking supplies with you, you could upgrade what you need, you find different things out about the sea. And eventually they made their way over here. And we got proof of that too, because we know that, a lot of the mummies during the 18th dynasty, the Ramesu dynasty, and King Tut and all of that, a lot of them they found cocaine products in their hair that were from the Americas, and cocaine is not indigenous to Africa, but we can trace it to then. And this is, what, 1900 BC? So they had already knew how to get here. So boat making was to some degree that it was technical enough to get here. So that though the rise of the Olmec culture are still the same people that are going to come from Africa. You can only explain the Stonehenge structures. They are only comparative to the pyramids, meaning that a lot of you don't know this. And some people, they talk about aliens and all that. Building the pyramids, complete garbage. Okay, black people built that. How did they do it? That is poured concrete, family. Once you figure out the different types of concrete, I think it's only like 3 or however many types of rocks it is. I'm not going to go into all that, but it's poured concrete. We even have people that have said and testified, when you get close to the pyramids and you look at the bricks, you can see some of them with the swirl shape, meaning that it was mixed by something. Okay, so these were built there. People think about all these different tricks and things that they had. These are, master masons being able to build all of that on the spot, perfectly aligned. Okay, and you had everybody else into it. And it's the same thing with the heads. You pour the concrete and then you chisel it. Okay, in the designs. All right, so that's just a little gem. I can't talk anymore about that. Okay, so you had all of these indigenous people here. And by the time of 1500, we had Chichimeca, which is a huge city in ancient Mexico, where a lot of these heads are found. I think it's actually like 15 of them or something. But all of this down here, they had that. And you had, the Kalina people. You had the Caribs. You had the Nahas. You had the Olmecchi, which would become the Olmecs. And what you got to understand, family, is a lot of time when these white explorers, when they rolled up on us, they would change our names after they did everything to us. The name changes started back then because they understood that if you didn't know where you came from, they got you. As we continue to indoctrinate y'all with all these Bibles and these weird comic books and Christianity, and all of these monsters and talking snakes, man, get this garbage out of here. So they changed a lot of our names, and that's what we were doing. And you had the same thing where you talk about Christopher Columbus finding the Olmec, not the Olmecs, I'm sorry, but the Arawaks, and Tainos. Those were not those original, names, and especially the indigenous black people of Jamaicans. And by that time, a lot of them were just going off the Caribs, indigenous Caribs or different names, some of the tribes I just gave you. So they use that for history because they know that those names are kind of like dog whistles for the people we conquered, so you got to watch when they do that. And this is just showing you after the Olmec, we know we got the Incas, we had the Aztec tribes and where they're going to go. And basically all these tribes are going to make their way into America, again, migrating. They didn't start there. Like I told you, middle America took the longest to get populated. Okay. Middle and Southern America. Okay. So these tribes are going to come up pretty much and give rise to all of what we call the Pueblo Indians. And then they talk about the Navajos and all of this. Navajo is actually another created name that they took on, but a lot of these names are not what you would call the indigenous tribe names, and they are created by Europeans and the colonization, so they can basically keep tabs on who they colonize. Okay, game check. y'all gonna listen today. Now, the biggest thing is, because we're getting ready to get out of here soon, we got this punk, Americo Vespucci. And a lot of people think that America is named after him, Americo, America, but this isn't even his name. Family, a lot of these Italian explorers and all that, they changed their names after findings in other places that they would come across, because during colonization, they kind of want to fit in, so you take on the name, but at the same time, I got my boot up your butt, my knife to your throat. Okay, like these jerks are no good. So Vespucci was another hitman, another colonizer. In 1532, the name America was permanently affixed on the continents. 1532, they're saying they call it America, right? Well, we know this is a lie. And the reason we know that it's a lie because, again, game family, we're going to end with this. And I hope y'all look this up so we don't have to debate about who named America and all of that. But the Amerisque Mountains, Amerisque, okay? Mountains. And this is a mountain range, a known mountain range in South America. And this is Nicaragua, Honduras area. And we talked about our people. It's the same thing with the Nile Valley. When you get to the mountain ranges, you can find food, you find, animals that lead you to water and all kind of things. And, mountains are, vital for the water and things that they give, for nature and all of that. And these people were here, so you had the Amerisque people, which is basically a Mayan hub, a Mayan tribe that made its way up here, descended from the Olmec, Amerisque. So when Vespucci came in contact to these people, that's where he took his name from, Amerigo, from Amerisque. Okay. And so they basically took that name at that time, and he wanted to get credit for the maps. Okay, so again, they were learning how to make maps. They were getting better. Christopher Columbus wasn't worried about a map. He was worried about pillaging. So Vespucci was a little bit smarter, and then a lot of these guys knew each other, and he wanted to get credit for putting it on the map. So he said, this is America, after Amerigo. But he took both names from this black Mayan tribe. That's game family. And make sure you do your research and look all of this stuff up. As always, I love all of you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I hope that you're enjoying. I'm willing to talk about anything you guys want to talk about as far as what I've covered and more. Promise you we're going to get into part 7 soon. It takes me a while to do these videos just because I want more support. I want people to really sit down and take their time with the information so they can get the game and not be enslaved by this doctrine, not be enslaved by anything, that we don't need to be. And that's what they were doing. They find America. They came to bring that doctrine. We're going to get back into it in part 7. Be one family. Enjoy Black First.